The Browning M2, 50 caliber machine gun, a formidable instrument of war, justly earned its enduring moniker, Medusa. When its definitive blueprint was finalized by the brilliant designer John Moses Browning in 1921, he unwittingly brought into existence what military chroniclers universally acknowledge as the most triumphantly engineered heavy machine gun in the annals of combat. This colossal weapon possessed the devastating capability to perforate the robust engine blocks of vehicles from a staggering distance of 500 yards, to violently dismantle light armor plating, and to propel a half-inch diameter projectile with terrifying velocity, screaming downrange at an impressive 2,910 feet per second. By the year 1942, the demand for these monstrous armaments was insatiable, with every American infantry company operating in the Pacific Theater desperately seeking to acquire as many as they could possibly field. Beyond its sheer destructive power, the profound psychological impact it exerted on the battlefield was considered invaluable, truly worth its weight in precious metals. Japanese combatants, recognizing its distinct, rapid-fire cadence, chillingly referred to it as the Woodpecker of death. However, a crucial detail, conspicuously absent from the valorizing narratives of recruiting posters, haunted the M2, a critical, potentially lethal imperfection that every seasoned machine gunner inevitably came to dread. While the weapon's theoretical rate of fire boasted an impressive 450 to 600 rounds per minute, the harsh realities of physics dictated a far more constrained operational window. In practical combat scenarios, a gunner might manage merely 90 to 120 seconds of continuous discharge before the intense thermal energy transformed this indispensable ally into an inert, useless mass of metal. The root of this predicament was not a scarcity of ammunition. Indeed, a well-drilled and adequately supplied crew could tirelessly feed the ravenous beast for extended periods. The insurmountable obstacle was, unequivocally, heat, a relentless, unseen adversary that frequently determined the thin line between survival and oblivion. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please feel free to write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Each precise impact of the M2's firing pin upon a primer initiated the explosive ignition of 240 grains of smokeless powder, a chemical reaction that unleashed an approximate 18,000 foot-pounds of raw energy. While the predominant portion of this formidable force efficiently propelled the half-inch bullet on its deadly trajectory, a significant fraction, roughly 30%, was directly transmuted into thermal energy. Consequently, with every single round discharged, the weapon's barrel absorbed a substantial load of approximately 5,400 foot-pounds of intense heat. Should a gunner unleash a mere 100 rounds in swift succession, they would be effectively injecting an astounding 540,000 foot-pounds of thermal energy into a steel tube that, by contrast, weighed a paltry 26 pounds. The underlying mathematical truth was both straightforward and utterly unforgiving in its implications. Following a mere 2 minutes of uninterrupted firing, the internal temperature of the barrel would inevitably soar past the critical threshold of 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Should the engagement demand pushing the weapon to a third minute of sustained discharge, the barrel would then be perilously flirting with temperatures approaching 100 degrees. At the alarming mark of 200 degrees Fahrenheit, the specialized steel of the barrel would commence a dangerous process of structural degradation, losing its fundamental integrity. The Army Ordnance Department was, of course, fully cognizant of this inherent limitation. The comprehensive technical manual, meticulously issued to every M2 crew, contained explicit, unambiguous warnings, prominently displayed in bold lettering, stating, "Sustained fire exceeding 2 minutes will result in barrel failure." The repercussions of disregarding this grave official admonition spanned a wide and terrifying spectrum, from merely problematic to absolutely catastrophic. In the most favorable yet still undesirable outcome, the barrel would suffer a slight but critical warping, irrevocably compromising the weapon's precision and sending its accuracy into a precipitous decline. Projectiles would then begin to keyhole, tumbling wildly and erratically sideways through the air instead of maintaining a true, stable flight path. The gravest scenario entailed the actual rupture of the barrel itself, a violent event that would hurl dangerous shrapnel back towards the gunner's face and render the sophisticated weapon permanently inoperable. Occupying the perilous middle ground on this scale of disaster was the thermal deformation of the headspace, that vital, precisely calibrated gap between the bolt face and the barrel, which would expand, leading to rounds detonating prematurely within the chamber. This perilous phenomenon was colloquially termed a cook-off by experienced gunsmiths, and it possessed the terrifying potential to transform a carefully controlled weapon into an uncontrollably destructive force in an instant. Established military doctrine had, in fact, directly confronted this critical operational limitation. Each designated M2 machine gun position was mandated to possess a readily available spare barrel, and its operating crew was required to be rigorously trained in the precise and swift barrel change procedure. The protocol dictated swapping the barrel every 90 seconds. By allowing the superheated barrel to cool for a period of 20 minutes, the crew could, in theory, maintain an indefinite rate of fire. The actual process of changing the barrel could be executed in approximately 30 to 45 seconds by a highly proficient and well-rehearsed crew, though this time frame might extend to 60 seconds when operating in challenging conditions such as darkness or under direct enemy fire. The Army even provided specialized asbestos gloves specifically designed for handling the searing hot barrels, although many crews found them excessively cumbersome and frequently resorted to using rags or even their uniform sleeves. However, the efficacy of this entire tactical framework hinged upon one absolutely critical, often unattainable, prerequisite: the luxury of having sufficient time to cease firing. Guadalcanal, in the grim month of November 1942, emerged as the pivotal crucible where the formidable Empire of Japan sought to conclusively determine whether American forces could be successfully repelled and driven back into the vast expanse of the sea. This strategically vital island, measuring approximately 90 miles in length and 25 miles in width, had been transformed into the undeniable focal point of the entire Pacific War, following the initial landings by Marines on August 7th. By November, the relentless fighting had tragically devolved into a brutal and entrenched stalemate, with all significant combat operations revolving around Henderson Field, the sole operational airstrip situated within the Solomon Islands. The prevailing military wisdom dictated that whoever exerted control over that crucial airstrip would ultimately command the skies, and by extension, whoever commanded the skies would decisively win the Pacific War. The Marines had meticulously established a defensive perimeter encircling Henderson Field, but this vital line of defense was dangerously stretched, indeed, exceedingly thin. The 1st Marine Division had been engaged in continuous, grueling combat for 3 consecutive months, sustaining daily casualties, and the arrival of desperately needed reinforcements was lagging significantly behind the rate at which their brave men were falling. On the somber night of November 12th, the incoming intelligence reports conveyed a chilling prediction. A major Japanese offensive was imminent. These reports proved tragically accurate. What those intelligence summaries, however, utterly failed to grasp was the sheer, overwhelming scale of the impending attack. This was not to be a mere probing action or a harassing mission designed to test defenses. Imperial General Headquarters had unequivocally committed the entirety of the 38th Infantry Division, a unit comprising fresh, well-trained troops recently dispatched from Japan itself, with explicit, uncompromising orders to relentlessly breach the American lines and reclaim Henderson Field at any conceivable cost. Marine Corporal Anthony Stein, affectionately known to his squad mates as Tony, occupied a critical defensive position on a topographical feature designated on maps as Hill 132, although it was universally referred to by the troops as Henderson Ridge. This natural ridge formed a formidable barrier along the southern approach to the vital airfield, rising approximately 50 feet above the dense surrounding jungle. Stein's formidable M2 50 caliber machine gun was strategically positioned to provide comprehensive cover for a specific draw, a natural constricted corridor nestled between 2 higher hills where the vegetation thinned out, just enough to create an unavoidable kill zone, roughly 80 yards deep and 40 yards wide. Subsequent military analysts would later commend this setup as a textbook defensive arrangement. However, Corporal Stein, with a far more immediate and grim understanding, privately considered it a death trap, acutely aware that if the Japanese forces surged through that draw with their anticipated numerical superiority, his 3-man gun crew would represent the sole, fragile bulwark, preventing them from completely overwhelming and rolling up the entire right flank of the American defense. The long-anticipated assault commenced with chilling precision at 8:02:30 hours on the morning of November 13th. There was no preceding artillery bombardment, no preliminary warning shots, merely an ominous procession of indistinct shapes materializing and moving stealthily through the profound darkness. There were multitudes of them, advancing with the kind of unwavering discipline and synchronized movement that is characteristic of professional soldiers who have undergone years of rigorous collective training. The attacking 38th Division was by no means composed of inexperienced green troops. These were hardened veterans who possessed extensive combat experience garnered from previous engagements in Manchuria and China. They understood the grim business of war intimately. Stein's assistant gunner, Private Eddie Morrison, was the first to discern their presence through the oppressive gloom, estimating a minimum of 200 men, possibly more, systematically forming up within the tree line. They were observed carrying specialized Bangalore torpedoes, designed for breaching wire obstacles, along with scaling ladders intended to surmount the defensive trenches, and a prodigious quantity of small arms ammunition, sufficient to sustain a prolonged and ferocious assault for many hours. The relentless onslaught had persisted for countless hours, a grueling test of endurance and resolve. It was at this critical juncture that the strategic calculus confronting the machine gunner Stein became alarmingly dire. Conventional military tenets for defense dictated the application of brief, measured bursts of fire, typically comprising 5 to 7 rounds, followed by a momentary cessation to survey the impact and conserve precious ammunition. Such a disciplined approach was also crucial for mitigating barrel overheating and preserving the overall reliability of the formidable M2 heavy machine gun. Yet, Stein possessed a clear and unsettling foresight regarding the imminent threat. The unfolding scenario was patently not one that could be managed with conservative, controlled bursts. The Japanese forces were visibly consolidating for a full-scale human wave offensive, a notoriously relentless tactic characterized by an unyielding advance, utterly disregarding casualties, until either their objective was breached or their manpower was entirely expended. Should Stein adhere to the standard practice of short bursts, an unacceptably large contingent of enemy combatants would undoubtedly survive the lethal kill zone, thereby managing to overwhelm his defensive position. Once these determined attackers bypassed his gun, they would be positioned behind the primary defensive line, with only scattered and ill-equipped rifle squads standing between them and the critically important airfield. Stein's operational resources included merely 2 spare barrels for his heavy machine gun. Adhering strictly to established doctrine, this allocation would afford him a cumulative firing duration of perhaps 6 minutes, meticulously distributed across an engagement period estimated at 30 minutes, allowing for the necessary intervals for barrel changes and cooling. His dedicated loader, Private First Class Jack Chen, had 12 substantial ammunition cans strategically positioned within immediate reach, containing a ready supply of 600 rounds, with additional rounds prepared for dispatch by waiting runners. Thus, the supply of ammunition itself was not the principal concern. The overwhelming challenge was the constraint of time. Stein was acutely aware that he was facing an assault force whose momentum and sheer numbers would necessitate a minimum of 8 to 10 minutes of unbroken, sustained fire to effectively neutralize and repel. The skilled engineers at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, the primary producers of M2 barrels throughout the Second World War, meticulously selected a specific steel alloy, formally designated as SAE 4150, for this vital component. This robust chromium molybdenum steel was chosen with deliberate precision, owing to its exceptional inherent capacity to endure repetitive cycles of extreme thermal stress and to consistently uphold its structural integrity even under immense pressure. At ambient room temperature, SAE 4150 exhibited an impressive tensile strength of approximately 125,000 pounds per square inch. The intricate manufacturing process commenced with the precise gun drilling of a solid steel billet, followed by the meticulous rifling of the barrel's interior, incorporating 4 distinct grooves with a right-hand twist of 1 complete turn in every 15 inches. The completed barrel then underwent a rigorous heat treatment regimen. It was first heated to a searing 1,550 degree RF, subsequently quenched in a bath of oil, and finally tempered at a precise temperature of 800 degree. This exacting process imparted to the steel its specific and critical hardness rating, falling within the range of Rockwell C28 to 32. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. It was precisely at this juncture that the intricate principles of material science transcended academic theory and became an immediate, stark matter of life or death on the battlefield. The specialized heat treatment applied to the steel created a unique microstructure, specifically engineered to manage thermal stress up to a critical threshold. However, the mechanical properties inherent to steel are subject to a predictable and detrimental degradation curve, as its temperature inexorably climbs. For instance, at a temperature of 600 degree F, the SAE 4150 steel astonishingly retained approximately 90% of its strength observed at room temperature. Yet, by the time it reached 900 degree, its strength plummeted to 70%. Further escalation to 1100 degrees resulted in a staggering loss of half its original strength. And at a critical temperature of 1200 degree F, a temperature that M2 barrels commonly attained after merely 150 to 180 seconds of continuous, sustained firing, the steel retained a perilous mere 40% of its initial tensile strength. Despite its appearance as solid metal, outwardly normal and intact, the barrel was in fact profoundly and irrevocably structurally compromised in ways that could manifest both instantly and with catastrophic consequences. The specific modes of failure were diverse and varied, yet seasoned machine gunners developed an acute ability to discern the critical warning signs. The initial indication was invariably a noticeable degradation in accuracy. As the barrel heated intensely and expanded minutely, the internal rifling grooves subtly widened on a microscopic scale, consequently causing the projectile to lose its vital stabilizing spin. Rounds that, under normal conditions, would consistently group within a tight 6-inch circle at a distance of 100 yards, began to scatter unpredictably, spreading out to a much wider 18 or even 24 inches. Tracer rounds, which were strategically integrated as every fifth round within standard M2 ammunition belts, started exhibiting peculiar curving trajectories through the air, instead of maintaining their characteristic straight flight paths. Astute gunners meticulously monitored their tracers. When these luminous projectiles began to spiral erratically, it was a grim signal that perhaps only 20 seconds remained before grave and potentially catastrophic problems would inevitably commence. The next critical issue to emerge was the dangerous phenomenon of headspace, a condition that rapidly escalated the danger. Headspace on an M2 machine gun referred to the precisely calibrated gap situated between the bolt face and the base of the cartridge. When a round was properly chambered, ideally set at a minuscule 0.063 inches, roughly equivalent to the thickness of 2 sheets of standard paper. As the barrel heated and expanded under sustained fire, that critical gap would invariably enlarge. Should this gap expand beyond its safe tolerance, the cartridge case would no longer receive adequate support when the firing pin subsequently struck the primer. The primer would ignite, pressure would rapidly build within the unsupported brass case, and it would inevitably rupture. In some instances, this might merely result in frustrating extraction failures and weapon jams. However, in more perilous scenarios, it meant superheated gases and sharp brass fragments violently venting back through the receiver directly into the gunner's face, posing a severe threat of injury. The most terrifying and absolute worst-case scenario was the catastrophic event known as thermal runaway. Under conditions of extreme and prolonged high temperatures, the very chamber of the barrel itself would become sufficiently hot to ignite the propellant powder within a chambered round, even without the firing pin ever making contact with the primer. This spontaneous ignition, termed a cook-off, would fire the round, which in turn would cycle the weapon and chamber the subsequent round. This newly chambered round would then also cook off due to the intense residual heat, initiating a terrifying, uncontrollable firing sequence that would continue relentlessly until the entire ammunition belt was completely expended. There was no mechanism to halt this process. The trigger became entirely irrelevant. The sole recourse available to the gunner was to physically break the ammunition belt, a desperate measure that, in the midst of active combat, might prove neither feasible nor safe. Official Marine Corps after-action reports, meticulously compiled from the Guadalcanal campaign, documented a staggering 23 distinct instances of M2 barrel failures occurring within just the initial 3 months of intense fighting. A significant 7 of these incidents culminated in complete and catastrophic barrel ruptures. Furthermore, 4 separate occurrences resulted in severe and debilitating injuries to the machine gun crews operating the weapons. In one particularly harrowing and grim incident recorded on October 8, 1942, a cook-off tragically claimed the life of a corporal from the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, when the runaway gun, traversing uncontrollably on its mount, inadvertently swept a torrent of rounds across his own defensive position. Anthony Peter Stein, on November 13, 1942, had reached the age of 23, a fact that positioned him as one of the comparatively older and more experienced individuals within his assigned squad. His formative years were spent in Dayton, Ohio, where his father diligently pursued a career as a skilled tool and die maker at the esteemed National Cash Register Company. Tony, following in his father's footsteps, immersed himself in the world of machining, dedicating 3 intensive years to mastering the intricacies of precision metalwork prior to the outbreak of the war. This specific background, unbeknownst to many at the time, would prove to be of far greater significance than initially perceived. Stein possessed an innate, intuitive comprehension of complex machinery that transcended the understanding of most young men his age. He intimately understood the behavior of metal when subjected to immense stress. He had personally witnessed steel distort and warp under the influence of extreme heat, observed critical tolerances shift as mechanical components expanded, and had acquired invaluable knowledge on how to operate effectively within or adeptly circumvent these inherent material limitations. Stein had voluntarily enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in January of 1942, subsequently enduring the rigorous challenges of boot camp at the renowned Paris Island training facility. Following his successful completion, he received a crucial assignment to the prestigious 1st Marine Division as a highly specialized machine gunner. The Marine Corps, discerning his exceptional mechanical aptitude, deliberately placed him in charge of the M2 heavy machine gun. The weapons platoon sergeant, after a single glance at Stein's comprehensive civilian work history, succinctly declared, "You're on the 50." By November of that year, Stein had accumulated an impressive record, having fired approximately 8,000 rounds through various M2 machine guns during both intensive training exercises and actual combat engagements. His intimate knowledge of the weapon's unique quirks, its formidable strengths, and its inherent limitations surpassed even his familiarity with his personal service rifle. Now, as he stood resolutely behind that very weapon, his gaze fixed on the ominous shapes multiplying in the deepening darkness, his mind was not consumed by thoughts of raw courage, but rather meticulously engaged in complex calculations that were purely rooted in the cold, hard logic of arithmetic. The impending engagement demanded more than mere bravery. It necessitated a pragmatic approach rooted in fundamental arithmetic. Positioned strategically, Stein observed a killing ground extending approximately 80 yards in depth. Japanese infantry, advancing at a tactical pace over challenging terrain, would traverse this distance in a mere 90 to 120 seconds. However, the enemy was not approaching in a singular mass. Stein distinctly perceived multiple echelons forming, adhering to the standard Japanese assault doctrine of successive waves spaced roughly 20 yards apart. This tactical arrangement implied that even if the initial wave were repelled, subsequent echelons would converge at 30-second intervals, creating a relentless, sequential onslaught. Morrison, Stein's assistant gunner, had meticulously surveyed the assembly area, estimating a formidable force of at least 200 men, possibly closer to 250. Given the typical Japanese infantry squad composition of 13-man sections, this translated to approximately 18 to 20 sections poised for assault. While not all of these units would funnel directly into Stein's kill zone, a substantial portion, at least half, was expected to. This meant a critical mass of 100 to 125 enemy combatants had to be neutralized immediately, or a catastrophic breach of their defensive line was inevitable. The M2 heavy machine gun, a formidable weapon, boasted a cyclic rate of fire ranging from 450 to 600 rounds per minute, depending on the operator's trigger control. Stein, a seasoned combat veteran, typically maintained an effective combat rate of around 500 rounds per minute, a balance between maximum output and sustained accuracy. To effectively neutralize 100 men, assuming an average expenditure of 4 to 5 rounds per individual to ensure a kill or incapacitating wound, an estimated 400 to 500 rounds were required. At his operational rate of 500 rounds per minute, this equated to 50 to 60 seconds of continuous trigger time. However, this calculation was based on an idealized scenario of perfect accuracy and the absence of suppressive fire, a sheer fantasy in the brutal reality of combat. Practical experience dictated that at least double that amount, perhaps 800 to 1,000 rounds, would be necessary to account for missed shots, the need for suppressive fire, and the undeniable fact that soldiers rarely succumb to a single hit. The grim mathematical projections continued to worsen. An expenditure of 800 rounds at a rate of 500 rounds per minute translated to 96 seconds of sustained fire. Factoring in the additional time required to traverse the weapon and engage targets across the entire breadth of the kill zone, the minimum engagement time extended to at least 2 minutes. Yet the Japanese assault was not a singular event. It was a series of waves. The entire engagement, from the initial contact to the final enemy soldier being either killed or driven back, was projected to last a minimum of 5 minutes. To sustain effective fire throughout this crucial 5-minute window, accounting for essential barrel changes, Stein estimated he would need an actual firing duration of approximately 8 to 10 minutes in total. He possessed 3 barrels, and standard operating procedure allocated him a mere 6 minutes of firing time spread over a 30-minute period. He was facing a critical deficit of at least 2 minutes, potentially 4 minutes, if the unforgiving realities of combat took their inevitable toll. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Stein's pivotal decision materialized in a mere 5 seconds, the scant window of opportunity before the Japanese advance commenced. His subsequent actions brazenly defied every technical manual, regulation, and official doctrine ever promulgated by the Marine Corps concerning the M2 Browning. Nevertheless, his choice was underpinned by robust thermodynamic principles, concepts readily grasped by any skilled machinist, even if every commissioned officer within the Corps would have instigated a court-martial for merely suggesting such a radical departure from protocol. The core concept was evaporative cooling, a physical phenomenon identical to the sensation of cold experienced upon exiting a swimming pool on a blustery day. The transformation of liquid water into vapor demands an immense absorption of energy, approximately 540 calories per gram at sea level. This latent heat of vaporization is precisely why perspiration effectively cools the human body, and why pouring water onto searing pavement elicits a distinctive, sizzling sound. Applying a liquid to a superheated metal surface establishes an extraordinarily efficient mechanism for heat transfer. The liquid absorbs thermal energy from the metal, rapidly converts into steam, and effectively carries that energy away into the surrounding atmosphere. For decades leading up to 1942, industrial machining operations had routinely employed liquid cooling. Cutting tools, drill bits, and milling machines all operated with a continuous flow of coolant to mitigate thermal damage. Typically, this coolant was a blend of water and soluble oil, but in dire emergencies, plain water sufficed. Stein's understanding of this principle stemmed from his prior employment at National Cash Register. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of coolant pump failures. Tools rapidly overheated and failed within seconds. Conversely, he had also observed machinists ingeniously improvising emergency cooling systems using whatever liquids were at hand, including some remarkably creative solutions that would never grace the pages of official manuals. The logistical challenge of cooling an M2 barrel in the maelstrom of combat was deceptively simple. The imperative for an immediate, readily available, and substantial supply of liquid. Water, from a thermodynamic perspective, was ideal. However, water was a precious commodity on Guadalcanal. Canteens were designated for hydration, not for the profligate expenditure on weaponry. Attempting to transport water cans to a forward fighting position solely for the purpose of cooling a gun barrel would necessitate extensive explanations to every officer from his immediate superior to division headquarters. Moreover, amidst the chaos of a nocturnal assault, one utilized whatever was within arm's reach. For Stein, and indeed for Morrison, Chen, and any other Marine in the immediate vicinity, that readily available liquid was urine. Human urine is composed of approximately 95% water, with the remaining 5% comprising dissolved urea, creatinine, uric acid, and various salts. From a heat transfer standpoint, its efficacy is nearly equivalent to pure water. The dissolved solutes, in fact, marginally elevate its boiling point. Pure water boils at 200 degrees F, while urine boils at approximately 214 degrees to 215 degrees. However, at barrel temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees, this slight 2 degree difference was utterly negligible. The liquid would instantaneously flash to steam regardless. The specific chemical composition of urine did introduce certain complexities. Urea, when subjected to high temperatures, decomposes into ammonia and carbon dioxide, ensuring a distinctly pungent odor during the process. Theoretically, the dissolved salts could leave residue deposits within the barrel, although at the extreme temperatures involved, most organic compounds would simply combust. The uric acid might potentially induce minor corrosion issues. However, these were concerns for a future day. The immediate, pressing problem was maintaining the barrel's operational temperature to sustain fire. Core regulations explicitly forbade the very action Stein was contemplating, although the specific prohibition was somewhat obscurely located within Technical Manual TM 9-1052-213 under the section ominously titled Unauthorized Cooling Methods. The manual unequivocally stated, under no circumstances should gunners attempt to cool barrels using non-approved liquids, including seawater, alcohol, petroleum products, or bodily fluids. Such practices may cause permanent damage to barrel surfaces and create unsafe operating conditions. This regulation existed because past conflicts had unequivocally demonstrated that soldiers, in their desperation, would resort to any expedient. And some of those expedients, regrettably, exacerbated rather than alleviated perilous situations. Stein, however, was impervious to regulations. His focus was solely on the stark realities of mathematics, the immutable laws of physics, and the looming threat of 200 Japanese soldiers poised to overrun his position. I am from the United States, and I find the video topic to be incredibly compelling. It highlights the ingenuity and desperate measures soldiers take in extreme combat situations when standard protocols are insufficient. It's a powerful testament to survival instinct and practical problem-solving under immense pressure. The Japanese forces were relentlessly pressing forward, determined to overwhelm the American position. At precisely 0237 hours, the night was shattered by the first concentrated burst of fire, a torrent of 35 rounds that tore through the leading Japanese section with the brutal efficiency of a power saw cleaving through timber. Corporal Stein, positioned at the heavy machine gun, operated the trigger with a practiced rhythm, allowing the ingrained muscle memory to govern the traversing and elevation mechanisms. Simultaneously, his mind was engaged in a critical internal countdown, aware that he had approximately 90 seconds before the weapon's barrel would require replacement. Beside him, Private First Class Morrison had already strategically placed an empty ammunition container near the gun, a silent signal of their unconventional plan. Both Morrison and Private Chen were fully briefed on the impending unorthodox procedure, having received Stein's concise, whispered instructions, a mere 15-second briefing that likely skirted, if not outright violated, several articles of military conduct. The enemy, however, continued their advance without faltering. Such was the nature of a night assault. Once committed, there was no possibility of a retreat. Indeed, the second wave of attackers was already in motion even as the survivors of the initial assault were still falling. Stein continued to unleash a devastating hail of 40 rounds into the dense ranks of the oncoming soldiers, systematically sweeping his fire from left to right across the designated kill zone. Each muzzle flash momentarily illuminated the profound darkness like a rapid strobe, obliterating his own night vision, but for fleeting half-second intervals, starkly revealing the targets with absolute clarity. In those brief, intense flashes, he could discern individual faces, the youthful visages of some, the steely determination etched onto others, and the raw terror in the eyes of many. Despite the harrowing sights, he maintained his relentless barrage. As the engagement reached the 92-second mark, the weapon's barrel was rapidly nearing its critical temperature threshold. Stein could distinctly feel the intense heat radiating from the machine gun, a searing warmth that permeated even through his standard firing stance. A telltale sign of overheating emerged as the tracer rounds began to exhibit a slight, spiraling trajectory, indicating that the rifling within the barrel was losing its effective grip on the projectiles. Above the deafening, percussive roar of the gun, he bellowed, "Barrel!" a command that Morrison, anticipating the moment, was already responding to, his hands poised on the barrel release mechanism. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of this compelling video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please also share a comment about where you are from and your thoughts on this incredible topic. The conventional protocol for a barrel change mandated that the gunner first lift the barrel locking pin, then rotate it a precise 90 degrees, and finally withdraw the barrel by pulling it to the rear. Private First Class Morrison, having diligently rehearsed this procedure an estimated 1,000 times, executed the intricate sequence with remarkable speed, completing the entire operation in an astonishing 12 seconds. Private Chen was equally prepared, not with a fresh box of ammunition, but with the empty ammo can, poised for its unconventional role. Stein swiftly seized the superheated barrel from Morrison, holding it horizontally, while Chen, with practiced precision, poured the container's contents directly onto the incandescent steel. The ensuing reaction was both instantaneous and profoundly dramatic. The mysterious liquid, making contact with metal that was radiating heat at a temperature well exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, underwent an instantaneous conversion to steam, producing a sound akin to the violent venting of a high-pressure cooker. A voluminous cloud of thick, opaque white vapor erupted from the barrel, carrying a distinct and utterly predictable odor. Stein methodically rotated the barrel, ensuring Chen's liquid streamed over every surface to achieve a uniform cooling effect. This entire improvised cooling process was completed in a mere 8 seconds. Before the last tendrils of steam had even dissipated from the treated barrel, Morrison had already slammed the fresh, cool barrel into position and secured it firmly. The total operational downtime for the weapon was an astonishingly brief 20 seconds. Stein immediately resumed his firing, directing a torrent of bullets into the second wave of Japanese soldiers who had exploited those precious 20 seconds to close the distance by an additional 15 yards. He expended another 80 rounds, observing the Japanese ranks visibly thinning under the relentless fire. Yet they showed no sign of breaking formation. Their commitment to the assault was absolute. Their command structure had undoubtedly impressed upon them that this specific engagement represented the decisive breakthrough attack, the pivotal moment that would ultimately lead to the recapture of Henderson Field and irrevocably alter the trajectory of the war. Their profound belief in this strategic imperative was evidently sufficient to compel their continued unyielding advance. The prevailing stench was utterly nauseating, a pungent ammonia odor originating from the decomposing urea, mingled with the acrid fumes of cordite smoke and the metallic tang of vaporized steel, creating an atmospheric cocktail so noxious it would induce retching in anyone not utterly preoccupied with the primal struggle for survival. Stein's eyes were streaming, a physiological response partly attributable to the chemical assault on his sinuses and partly to the pervasive smoke and blinding muzzle flashes. Yet he remained indifferent to his discomfort. The machine gun continued to fire, consistently placing rounds on target, and that, in the grim reality of the moment, was the sole and absolute imperative. Precisely 4 minutes into the ferocious engagement, Stein initiated his second barrel change. The first barrel, having undergone its emergency cooling and then rested for 3 minutes, was now sufficiently cooled and ready for redeployment. As an additional precautionary measure, Chen administered another round of liquid cooling to it, generating yet another billowing cloud of steam that momentarily enveloped and obscured the entire gun position. The Japanese, witnessing these perplexing steam formations, must have undoubtedly pondered the nature of the extraordinary weapon system the Americans had brought to bear against them. The intense firefight, from the initial shot to the final one, endured for a total of 9 minutes and 40 seconds. During this relentless period, Stein discharged a staggering 847 rounds, meticulously rotating through his trio of barrels 4 complete cycles, with Private Chen performing the emergency liquid cooling procedure on each barrel twice. Throughout this entire sustained ordeal, the machine gun performed flawlessly, never once jamming, misfiring, or failing in any capacity. As the last Japanese soldier either succumbed to the relentless fire or retreated into the impenetrable darkness of the jungle, Stein's hands trembled so violently that he found himself utterly unable to ignite a cigarette. Morrison, observing his comrade's profound exhaustion, had to perform the simple act for him. 6 hours later, the dawn gradually ascended, casting its revealing light upon the grim tableau of their night's work. Bodies were arrayed in overlapping rows across the entire kill zone, their density most pronounced approximately 40 yards from the position, precisely where the second and third waves of attackers had tragically converged with the casualties of the first. The division's graves registration unit dedicated 2 full days to the meticulous task of cataloging the fallen enemy soldiers, directly in front of Stein's position. The official tally recorded 73 confirmed enemy personnel killed in action, directly attributable to the M2 machine gun emplacement on Henderson Ridge. Additionally, an estimated 15 to 20 probable kills were noted, based on blood trails leading back into the dense jungle, though no physical remains were recovered for these. Later interrogations of captured Japanese soldiers from the 38th Division revealed that their commanding officers had specifically identified Stein's gun position as the critical breakthrough point, fully anticipating to overwhelm it through sheer numerical superiority. Their strategic assessment, however, proved to be tragically mistaken. At 0800 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Puller, the formidable commanding officer of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, arrived to personally inspect the position. Puller was already a living legend within the Marine Corps, a recipient of 2 Navy Crosses, renowned for his absolute fearlessness, and possessing a command philosophy that masterfully blended unwavering professionalism with a complete and utter disregard for anything that did not directly contribute to winning battles. He surveyed the grim body count, then turned his gaze to Stein's machine gun, and finally to the empty ammunition can resting beside the position. One of the cans still contained a small pool of residual liquid at its bottom. Puller, with a curious intensity, dipped his finger into the substance, sniffed it, and then uttered a remark that has since been recounted in at least 6 distinct versions across various historical narratives. The most appropriate, printable rendition of his inquiry was, "Corporal, what in the name of God is this?" Stein, without hesitation, proceeded to explain every detail. The intricate thermal calculations that underpinned their method, the fundamental evaporative cooling principle they had exploited, and the precise emergency barrel cooling procedure that had enabled the machine gun to maintain continuous fire for nearly 10 uninterrupted minutes. Puller listened intently, his expression remaining completely neutral and unreadable, while Morrison and Chen stood rigidly at attention, silently bracing themselves for an immediate arrest. The expectation lingered that an immediate apprehension was imminent. Upon the cessation of Stein's unusual procedure, Puller deliberately approached the M2 heavy machine gun, his hand tracing the still-mounted barrel. What he observed was profoundly compelling. While the barrel exhibited some superficial discoloration and staining, there was a complete absence of warping, no discernible structural damage, and critically, no indicators whatsoever of the catastrophic failure that, by all conventional understanding, should have inevitably occurred after such extreme use. The subsequent events are subject to various interpretations, with historical accounts diverging. Some narratives suggest that Puller promptly initiated a recommendation for a Silver Star for Stein. Other sources contend that he instead submitted a formal report, which in turn instigated an official inquiry by the division's Ordnance Department. However, the unequivocally documented record within the 1st Marine Division confirms that on November 15, 1942, Puller dispatched a commendation report specifically lauding Corporal Stein for his extraordinary initiative and remarkable technical innovation demonstrated under intense combat conditions. This commendation then meticulously ascended through the military hierarchy, initially evolving into a recommendation for a Bronze Star, a recognition that was subsequently elevated to a Silver Star by the direct intervention of Major General Alexander Vandergrift himself. Despite the recognition, the Marine Corps, as an institution, found itself in a state of profound apprehension and dismay. Within a mere week of these events, Stein received orders to report to division headquarters, where he was instructed to replicate his unconventional cooling technique for a distinguished panel. This panel included 2 lieutenant colonels from Ordnance and a major representing the Judge Advocate General's JAG office. The JAG officer unequivocally articulated that any unauthorized alterations to established weapons procedures constituted a direct violation of Article 92 of the Articles of War, specifically pertaining to the failure to comply with lawful orders or regulations. The potential ramifications for such an infraction were severe, ranging from a reduction in rank to a dishonorable discharge, with the exact penalty being contingent upon the specific circumstances and the discretion of the commanding officers involved. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of this video. We would be truly grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the fascinating topic discussed in this video. Conversely, the ordnance officers present exhibited a keen desire for granular details. They arrived equipped with a dedicated demonstration M2 machine gun, a precise chronograph designed to measure muzzle velocity, and an ample supply of ammunition to facilitate comprehensive live fire testing. They meticulously directed Stein to repeat his unique cooling procedure a total of 6 times, during which they assiduously recorded critical parameters such as barrel temperature, the precise timing of the process, and its overall efficacy. The conclusive test results stemming from that pivotal November 1942 demonstration were immediately classified as restricted and formally archived within Ordnance Report 0421 LS73, a document that would not see declassification until 1967. What these meticulously conducted tests ultimately unveiled stood in stark contradiction to 2 decades of firmly entrenched and universally accepted doctrine, concerning barrel cooling methodologies within the military. The ordnance officers employed highly accurate thermocouple probes to measure the barrel's temperature, both before and after the application of Stein's liquid cooling method. The data revealed a dramatic effect. A barrel registering an initial temperature of 150 degrees rapidly plummeted to 680 degrees in approximately 15 seconds when subjected to Stein's innovative technique. In stark contrast, attempting to air-cool that identical barrel from 150 degrees to 680 degrees necessitated a protracted period of 7 minutes and 20 seconds. This demonstrated that the liquid cooling method was, astonishingly, roughly 29 times more efficient in achieving the desired temperature reduction. The comprehensive chemical analysis yielded mixed conclusions. It was indeed confirmed that the decomposition of urea generated ammonia vapor, which was not only unpleasant but also carried potential health hazards, particularly within confined operational spaces. Furthermore, the dissolved salts inevitably left microscopic deposits within the barrel's rifling, which could theoretically impact accuracy after numerous repeated applications of the method. Yet, crucially, the barrels themselves exhibited no signs of warping, no structural cracking, and no catastrophic structural failure, defying conventional expectations. The precipitous drop in temperature inherently induced thermal shock, a sudden and intense contraction of the steel material. However, the specialized SAE 4150 chromium molybdenum steel utilized in the barrels proved remarkably resilient, demonstrating sufficient robustness to withstand these extreme thermal stresses. Following a series of 6 cooling cycles, the test barrel displayed a measurable wear of only 0. 3 inches beyond what would be considered normal firing wear, a figure that remained well within acceptable operational tolerances. The Marine Corps thus confronted an acute institutional quandary. They found themselves unable to officially sanction or endorse the act of urinating on machine guns. The public perception or optics of such a practice would be undeniably disastrous. Furthermore, the associated health concerns were entirely legitimate and could not be overlooked. One could only imagine the immense difficulty of attempting to articulate and justify such a procedure to Congress during critical appropriations hearings. Nevertheless, the profound and undeniable efficacy of the results could not be disregarded. Stein had, against all established technical manuals and conventional wisdom, achieved something deemed impossible: sustained fire that significantly surpassed the weapon's theoretical operational limits, all without incurring catastrophic failure. The eventual resolution to this perplexing situation was, in typical fashion, distinctly bureaucratic in nature. The Marine Corps opted for a nuanced approach. They neither officially approved the unconventional method, nor did they pursue court-martial proceedings against anyone involved. Instead, the incident was discreetly documented within training materials, serving as an illustrative example of unauthorized field modifications. While acknowledged for their effectiveness under specific, extenuating circumstances, such modifications were unequivocally reiterated as remaining strictly prohibited under standard operating procedures. The truly significant shift, however, occurred in the doctrine surrounding the deployment and rapid exchange of spare barrels. Prior to the Guadalcanal campaign, most M2 machine gun positions were typically equipped with only a single spare barrel. Following the invaluable lessons learned at Guadalcanal, this standard was substantially increased, mandating a minimum of 2 spare barrels, and ideally 3 whenever logistical support permitted. Concurrently, the emphasis placed on the speed and efficiency of barrel-changing procedures escalated dramatically. Training cycles that had previously allocated a mere 2 hours to barrel-changing drills were significantly expanded to a rigorous 8 hours. Marines were subjected to intensive practice, performing barrel changes blindfolded, while wearing gas masks, and under simulated combat fire, until they could consistently execute the entire procedure in under 20 seconds. The post-war evolution and development of quick-change barrel systems directly owed a significant debt to pioneering incidents such as Stein's innovative, albeit unconventional, solution. For instance, the M2HB model, which was formally introduced into service in 1945, incorporated an improved barrel release mechanism. This enhancement successfully reduced the time required for a barrel change from the previous 30-45 seconds to a much more efficient 15-20 seconds. The M60 machine gun, which saw its introduction in 1957, was conceptually designed from its very inception with quick barrel changes as a paramount and foundational requirement. With a proficiently trained crew, the average time for a barrel change was a remarkably swift 8 seconds. Subsequent weapon systems, such as the M240 and M249, further built upon this evolving doctrine, fundamentally conceptualizing the barrel as a consumable component that combat crews would anticipate swapping multiple times during the course of a single engagement. Military research into advanced barrel cooling techniques persisted throughout the Cold War era. In 1954, Aberdeen Proving Ground conducted a series of classified tests, meticulously exploring a diverse array of emergency cooling methods. These investigations included the use of water, oil, compressed air, and, indeed, urine. The comprehensive results unequivocally confirmed Stein's earlier empirical findings. Liquid cooling was demonstrably effective. It worked with remarkable speed, and crucially, it did not cause destructive damage to the barrel itself. These tests also delved into the practicality of employing pre-positioned water containers at established defensive positions, specifically designated for barrel cooling purposes. This practice, validated by the research, subsequently became a standardized component of Vietnam-era military doctrine, underscoring the enduring impact of insights gained from such field experiences. Tony Stein successfully navigated the harrowing Guadalcanal campaign and continued to fight gallantly through the remainder of the Pacific Theater. He earned a battlefield commission, achieving the rank of second lieutenant at Bougainville in 1943, survived the brutal and devastating ordeal of Peleliu in 1944, and bravely landed with the 5th Marine Division at Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. On that grim black sand beach, Stein distinguished himself by leading 8 separate audacious charges against heavily fortified Japanese pillboxes. He personally destroyed 4 enemy positions and, with extraordinary courage, evacuated wounded Marines from under intense enemy fire. Tragically, he was killed by sniper fire on the 3rd day of the ferocious battle. In recognition of his unparalleled heroism and sacrifice, President Harry Truman posthumously awarded him the Medal of Honor. The nation's highest accolade for valor, the Medal of Honor, was bestowed upon him posthumously, a solemn tribute to a life given in extraordinary service and sacrifice, and this revered decoration, presented in recognition of unparalleled bravery and acts of courage performed above and beyond the call of duty, acknowledged the ultimate sacrifice of an individual whose unwavering commitment to his comrades and country had been unequivocally demonstrated in the crucible of battle. While the official citation eloquently acknowledged his exceptional heroism and conspicuous gallantry, detailing the profound impact of his actions, it conspicuously omitted any reference to the harrowing events at Henderson Ridge. Specifically, it made no mention of that pivotal night when he remarkably sustained continuous fire from a heavy machine gun for a full 10 minutes. An astonishing feat accomplished through a desperate amalgamation of fundamental physical principles, sheer human will, and whatever available liquids he could improvise as a cooling agent. The circumstances surrounding this particular act of ingenuity, born from the direst necessity, remained unrecorded in the formal commendation. The formidable M2 Browning machine gun, serial number 32475, which he wielded with such audacious resourcefulness on that fateful night in 1942, possesses a remarkable history of its own. This iconic weapon, renowned for its robust design and enduring reliability, not only persevered through the intense hostilities of World War II, but subsequently saw further deployment in the Korean War, continuing its relentless service across multiple theaters of conflict. Ultimately, after an estimated 400,000 rounds had passed through its barrel, the venerable firearm was finally decommissioned from active operational duty in 1968. Today, it stands as a silent, powerful testament to the individual's courage and its own storied past, proudly displayed within the hallowed halls of the National Museum of the Marine Corps at Quantico, Virginia. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. However, the informational display accompanying the legendary M2 Browning makes no specific note of the unconventional cooling improvisation. This omission reflects a particular aspect of military culture. Some narratives, particularly those involving unorthodox methods, are often preferred to be preserved within the annals of Marine lore, circulated exclusively among the brotherhood of the Corps. These are the tales understood by those who grasp that securing victory in the unforgiving landscape of combat sometimes necessitates transgressing established protocols and deviating from standard operating procedures, rules that were simply not conceived for the unique and unimaginable crucible of hell that soldiers frequently encounter. Indeed, the brave men who steadfastly defended Henderson Ridge on that perilous November night were acutely aware of a profound truth that transcends official doctrine. They understood that genuine innovation, born from extreme pressure, might appear crude, unsanitary, or even smell bad, and often directly contravenes prescribed regulations. Yet, in the face of overwhelming odds, such audacious resourcefulness can nonetheless preserve human existence and ultimately ensure survival. This invaluable lesson, though conspicuously absent from any official tactical manual or training guide, unequivocally warrants formal inclusion and recognition for its critical role in the reality of warfare.